Hello guys, welcome to the Artifactory Enterprise webinar. I think it's about time. We have all the audience that we were expecting on the call, so I think it's time to begin. So without further ado, we'll talk about today in terms of how to scale Artifactory for enterprise, and we will touch base on several key topics. Few of them would be security related, few of them would be scaling related, few of them would be monitoring and alerting related, few of them would be storage related, and so on. So this is what we are going to talk about today. A little introduction: myself, Raghav Baldania, part of the solutions engineering team at JFrog. You might have known by now that I do a lot of webinars with customers online in terms of going through various different topics. I've also been doing Docker series for past couple of weeks, and also work with customers in terms of architecture solutions, as well as designing any custom solution for customers in terms of Artifactory and integrations with other products, or just designing the layout for their Artifactory deployment. The agenda today would be, we will do a quick overview of Artifactory. Just a quick recap. I won't go much deeper into the basics today because we do have dedicated webinar for the basics of Artifactory. So we'll skip that part today and just go over a quick recap of what Artifactory is and what it's capable of. And then we will discuss what are the challenges that you might expect while you are scaling. So this could be in terms of security, in terms of storage, in terms of monitoring and alerting. The other topic that we'll talk about today would be locality, as well as high availability of your Artifactory architecture. And then we'll talk about what are the storage limitations that one may run through when they are scaling their infrastructure for the enterprise. Okay, so let's get started. Artifactory, as you all know, it's a universal binary repository manager. It's both a developer's tool as well as an operations tool. So Artifactory is actually catering both sides of the houses, R&D as well as operations. It specializes in hosting and managing packages for all different sort of package types in a way that, because it's a universal tool, Artifactory can host everything from Java, Maven, Gradle, Build to Ruby or Python, or you have repositories or Docker repositories or NPM packages or NuGet galleries and Debian packages and so on, right? So Artifactory is actually a universal repository manager. We also added a couple missing pieces to the puzzle in last couple months. We added PHP Composer, we added Chef and Puppet repositories. So Chef and Puppet are now first-class citizens for Artifactory, as well as we also integrated with Conan. So Conan is also now first-class citizen with Artifactory. So now you can use Artifactory for your C and C++ development. Okay. So quickly going through the software development lifecycle that relates to Artifactory, how consumers and how customers do their software development with respect to Artifactory, right? How Artifactory sits in the center of this entire pipeline. So I'll discuss this very briefly. We did touch about this in our previous webinars as well, so I won't go much detailed into this. So every software development starts with the developer writing code, and then as part of that code development, a developer will declare their dependencies. He will decide what dependencies he needs, and those dependencies would come from Artifactory. Doesn't matter these are local dependencies or these are remote dependencies. It means that if they are remote, then they need to be downloaded from the central repositories like Docker Hub, NPM Registry, Bintray for JCenter, OPKG packages, or anything, right? So any central repository dependency would be also resolved by Artifactory. After the local build is done, developer is really confident about his build. They will check in the code to their version control system, and then as part of this check-in, the VCS in turn will trigger an automated build on your CI servers. So these CI servers could be Jenkins, Hudson, Bamboo, TeamCity, Travis, TFS, anything, right? Now these builds on your CI servers would again have the same set of dependencies that you had during your dev build, right? So Because Artifactory already supplied those dependencies earlier, now Artifactory has the entire set of those dependencies cached locally. So even if you downloaded hundreds of dependencies from central repository, from the internet, now Artifactory has all of them cached locally. So when your CI server will request for those dependencies, Artifactory would be able to supply them right away without going into any latency issues, right? So your build time actually goes down to multiple folds. So after your build is done, you'll be able to deploy the build back to Artifactory. So now Artifactory is not only acting as your dependency manager, but it also acts as your deployment target. You can deploy your builds onto Artifactory. The reason you want to deploy your builds onto Artifactory is that now Artifactory can act as a single source of all the binaries for you. Your dependencies, your builds, your releases, your plugins, your libraries, your extensions, every single binary that you have can be located into one application, right? So it's easy to manage. Secondly, it will also capture the entire state of your build so that it can act as your single source of truth for your build and bill of materials. So your variables, your environment variables, your system variables, your complete dependencies, your transient dependencies, everything would be captured by Artifactory when you do this deployment. We'll take a look at this in a moment in terms of how the structure looks like. And after the build is deployed onto Artifactory, your QA tools can come in, pick up the builds and do the testing from Artifactory. And then once the testing is done, they can contribute the metadata back to those builds or those artifacts onto Artifactory. So now Artifactory knows what build is a good build or what artifact is a good artifact and what artifact is a bad artifact, right? So based on this, you can also do your promotions for your builds or artifacts within Artifactory. Now, as you are moving further along this promotion chain, when you are really confident about a build, when you have a golden build or when you have a release candidate, you can deploy this build into your production with your orchestration tools like Chef or Puppet or Ansible or Docker, SaltStack. All these can connect to Artifactory, get the artifacts and start doing the deployment. And if you are someone who is distributing your builds to external customers, then you can push your binaries from Artifactory to Bintray. Bintray is our distribution platform that sits behind the Akamai CDN and does the distribution for you across the globe, right? So if you have something that needs to be consumed by external customers, you can distribute it via Bintray right from Artifactory. So as you can see how Artifactory plays a key role right from your software development all the way to deployment or distribution of your packages, right? So this is how Artifactory sits right in the core of your entire CI/CD pipeline. Now, as we are talking about automating all these processes, we also need to consider the explosion of binaries that we are generating. What I mean is, when you are doing continuous integrations and continuous deployments of your builds, you are generating hundreds and millions of artifacts that has no account of, right? And then this has gone up over a period of time. We started over with Agile, and then the continuous integration came in, where from a nightly build or weekly build, we started doing continuous builds. And from there, we also evolved into CD. So now we are doing continuous deployment along with continuous integrations, right? So that pipeline is now end-to-end. This means that you are generating hundreds and thousands of artifacts now, be it your builds or be it your binaries. And then the concept of containerization came in when now you are putting everything inside a container and then shipping the container. So basically now you are improvising your deployment channels. It means that you are generating more and more artifacts. And latest, we are moving towards the microservice architecture for all modern applications, right? So it means that now we are breaking a big monolithic application into smaller, tinier applications. So it means that this would require you to do your continuous integration for all those microservices. It means that now you are doing 8 times more builds or 8 times more artifacts than you used to. So this 8 or 10 or whatever number of microservices you have, right? So it means that we are generating this huge pile of artifacts. What to do with it? How to manage this pile of artifacts? How to make sure that out of this hundreds of thousands of artifacts we are developing, we are promoting the right candidate to our customers, or we are promoting the right candidate into our production environment or to our QA environment? How do we make sure that this cycle that we are having, or the cycle that we are used to, is still going to prevail, right? So this is something to keep thinking about. I'll touch base on this point after a couple of minutes, but one question for you guys to think about. So in this haystack of binaries that we are generating, as I mentioned, how do we pick the right binary, or how do we pick the right candidate that should go into production, and then that will go into production, right? So to help solve this use case, what Artifactory provides you is the capability to attach metadata or properties to your artifacts and your builds, and then consume that metadata with Artifactory Query Language. So that's a proprietary query language that is developed just for Artifactory. So this way you have the right set of tools, you have the right set of weapon to deal with this kind of issues. You can query Artifactory for any kind of artifacts and get the relevant information that you're looking for. A really tinier example would be, let's say you have a couple of millions of artifacts within Artifactory, and you are doing promotion with Artifactory, and you are also doing your QA through Artifactory, right? So your QA is picking up builds from Artifactory and then deploying builds back based on deploying the metadata back based on their test results, their input on the build or on the binary. So when you are doing this deployment into production, what your Chef or Puppet or any orchestration tool can look for is what artifact has so-and-so release version, has so-and-so, was built by so-and-so component, and then it has, let's say, property QA equals to pass, for example, right? That was supplied by QA if all your test cases pass. So these kind of complex queries you can run onto AQL, and AQL will be able to give you precise results, not just vague results. So even out of a couple million artifacts, you are looking for one single artifact, you can get that with the help of AQL. And then when it comes to quantity, we all know that scaling Artifactory or scaling any enterprise applications to a next level is not easy. Well, it's easy in a way if you want to do it faster, but the approach is you want to make sure that you are not breaking anything, so you are keeping further scaling into mind so that you don't have issues scaling again in future, so you're not hitting the wall when you want to scale again. So these kind of things you want to keep in mind, right? So this is what Artifactory solves the problem, where Artifactory itself is truly reliable in terms of scaling. It will scale with you. It doesn't matter you want to scale horizontally or vertically. Artifactory can scale with you. And the really good example is right on the screen right now, where one of our customer, it's one of the largest software enterprise in the world right now. They are, and by the way, this numbers are about a year old, and this has changed in last year. So from 60 terabyte, they are now up to 110 terabytes. Approximately 110 terabytes. So as you can see, they are doing 110 terabytes of transactions with Artifactory, and they don't have any issues at all. Their number of artifacts has gone up to about, I think it went from 26.5 million to almost like 30 or 40 millions now. So this is a huge number with Artifactory, and this is not just one. This is not an exception. This is not just one customer having this kind of setup. We do have several customers who has this kind of setup, who are doing this big level of scaling with Artifactory and are not seeing any issues at all. Just to get this into some sort of respective statistics, we do have about 7 to 8 largest telecom companies in the world using Artifactory. Same number goes with largest financial institutions, as well as same goes with the software and enterprise application software companies. So coming back to our challenges, what kind of challenges you may expect or you may see when you are scaling? Doesn't matter if it's Artifactory or if it's in any enterprise application, right? These are the few key challenges that comes in mind when I think about scaling. One is the distributed team. When you are scaling, you're also scaling organically. It means that you are adding more and more team members. You are adding more resources to your project. So it means that your teams are now located geographically in different locations. How do you make sure that these coordination or this collaboration challenge is met with Artifactory. Same thing goes with making sure that your Artifactory instance itself is highly available, so that you are not falling a victim of any VM outage or any network outage, for example. So this way, we may want to make sure that because Artifactory sits in the core of the end-to-end process, you want to make sure that it's highly available for your scaling. And a good problem to have along with scaling is the storage scalability. How do we make sure that what kind of options do we have for scaling, and how Artifactory reacts to scaling when you're adding more storage, right? And then as the team gets distributed, as the pipeline gets highly available, you want to also add a security component. You want to make sure that your pipeline is secure, your data is secure. And then at the end, because you have built this highly capable pipeline, you want to make sure that you're monitoring and managing this pipeline correctly, right? So you want to make sure that you are catching all the issues ahead of time, so that you're not falling the victim of any outage or any discrepancy in your application. So let's talk about your first challenge. That's a distributed team, and then that's a locality challenge, right? If you have a team distributed in North America, you have a team in Europe, and then let's say you have a team in Asia Pacific, for example, in India, and you have your main data center located in North America. So your developers located in EMEA and India are coming to US data center, fetching the artifacts, and then they are running their builds locally and then deploying their builds onto the US data center again, right? So there's this huge latency issue. Doesn't matter if it's pulling the artifacts or it's pushing the artifacts, right? So these kind of issues can be solved if you add Artifactory at a local site. So in this scenario, we would add Artifactory into Europe data center, or Europe locally as well as in India locally, and then let Artifactory sync within themselves. So Artifactory US will sync to Artifactory in EMEA and Artifactory in India. So that's where you have a three-way full mesh topology, sharing the artifacts among each other, so that your developer, when they come into the office in the morning, they have all the artifacts available without any issues, right? So this is kind of the locality issue can be resolved with Artifactory. In terms of the replication or syncing, Artifactory does support a full mesh topology. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have these three Artifactory instances talk to each other in terms of read and write. And this number is not just limited to 3. We do have customers doing 9 data centers in a full mesh topology. So and it's working really well for them. So what I mean by this is that the benefit here you get is your artifacts or your Artifactory instances are, first, they are available locally to your developers. Secondly, you are eliminating the entire latency issues. And then you are also making sure that if you want to have some downtime in Artifactory in US, your remote sites, that is America, or sorry, the Europe or the India site, are not affected by this downtime, right? You wanna isolate these environments, but at the same time, you also want to make sure they are in sync. So these are the benefits that you get from a full mesh topology. The only drawback would be that what kind of replication you set up. If you're setting up a pull replication, then pull replication would be a proxy, right? It's a lazy proxy. It's not going to mirror the entire site. So in that case, we do recommend to set up a push replication, so that with the help of push replication, you can set up an event-based replication that's going to push everything as the event occurs, right? So you are not pushing, or you are not waiting for the push to happen on a request basis, in just like the pull replication. So just to keep this example into picture, let's consider we have 5 different locations, so A, B, C, and D. So there's Amsterdam, Bangkok, Cape Town, and Denver. Now, these 4 data centers would have 4 repositories each, right? So the formula that we go by is n square. N is the number of data centers, and n square is the number of total repositories you need. So each data center will have 4 repositories. So let's take an example of Amsterdam here. Amsterdam repository will have 1 Amsterdam local repository, And then it will have repositories for Bangkok, for Chicago, or Cape Town, sorry, and for Denver, right? In the second data center, you will have the similar setup. You will have a repository for your own site, so that's Bangkok, and then you'll have 3 repositories for each other data center, so A, C, and D. Similarly goes with Cape Town and Denver. So as you can see that at the end of the day, we'll have A, B, C, and D repositories on each site. Now, setting up the replication, what you will end up doing is the repository A on site A is going to write to all other A's. Okay. Repository B on site B, this guy, is going to write to all other B's. Repository C on this site is going to write to all other C's, and same thing goes with D. So this way, and then at the end, what you'll do is you will create a virtual repository on each site that is going to bring together all these four different repositories within one repository. So this way, your developer is not seeing all these complex setup. For them, they just need to point to this virtual repository, and that's it. They don't care about how you are doing this application behind the scene, how complex it is behind the scene, how many repositories they are behind the scene, nothing. They only talk to one repository. And then for you, it's become much more easier that if you want to add another data center, for example, let's say now you are adding another site called E. In this case, all you have to do is add a site, add a repository called E on each site here behind this virtual repository. So scaling is much more easier for you as an admin now without having to worry about your developer to change any config. Your developer are still pointing to this virtual repository, right? You are making this change behind the scene. They are not seeing that you are adding a repository or deleting the repository. So this way you can scale without having to change any configurations on your client side, which is what we want, right? We want to make our scaling seamless. Now, the second challenge that comes is the reliability of the pipeline. We want to make sure that the pipeline is highly available. And because Artifactory, as we mentioned earlier, sits in the center or in the core of your entire development cycle, we want to make sure that it is available all the time. So Artifactory has something called HA, that is highly available cluster feature. So you can set up Artifactory as an HA cluster, and then as part of this cluster, you can have as many nodes as you want within the cluster. And this cluster would be up and running all the time unless all your nodes in the cluster goes down. In this case, it's a disaster, right? It's not an outage. So let's say you have a 3-node cluster and one of the nodes goes down, your cluster would be still up and running without any issues. Your end users or your developers won't see this kind of outages at all. Like this is really abstract for them. They only talk to the load balancer, and load balancer make sure that it's routing the request to the available Artifactory instance behind the scene. And then as part of this HA cluster, you get a couple benefits is you get 0 downtime for any maintenance, and then 0 downtime for upgrades. You can do rolling upgrades on the HA cluster without having to bring the cluster down, right? So these kind of capabilities you get with the highly available cluster. And the added benefit is that now, because Artifactory also supports multiple Docker registries, your infrastructure is now highly available Docker registry, right? Now, and this is something unique, so that you can make sure that your Docker infrastructure is also highly available. Couple benefits of using Artifactory. Now, since we are talking about Docker, I want to touch about a couple benefits of using Artifactory as Docker registry. So first is, we already talked about that is highly available. Making Artifactory highly available makes sure your Docker registry is also highly available so that your mission critical applications are always running. Secondly, because Artifactory is proven, it's a mature product, it's been there for a long time. It also touch bases on all the security things that Docker missed out, right? So this is something that you can leverage for your Docker registry. So all the benefits that you get from Artifactory can be applied onto your Docker registry as well. And the integrations that we have, as you might have known by now, Artifactory integrates with so many different platforms and so many different dev tools and build tools. So you can leverage this integration for your Docker registries as well. And lastly, because Artifactory is it's really modern tool, it works with your development organizations as well as your DevOps organizations, both of them can take advantage of this highly available Docker registries on Artifactory. Now, in order to make Artifactory highly available, there are three key components that is required. One is the file store, second is the database, and third is the Artifactory application itself, right? Now, what these three components do in sync is that any artifact that comes to Artifactory application, Artifactory will calculate the checksum, store the metadata as well as checksum in the database, and it will store the actual file onto file store. So that this is how it makes sure that your properties and metadatas are sitting onto database and your actual file is sitting onto the file store, right? Now this is a typical HA setup. What you have is, as you can see in the diagram here, you'll have the load balancer in the front. So any communication to the HA cluster would go through a load balancer. And behind the load balancer, you have your Artifactory instances. In our case, we have 3 node cluster. You can have 2 node cluster or 10 node cluster, doesn't matter, right? And then all these nodes would share a common database and share a common file store. In my diagram, I'm using NFS storage. It doesn't have to be NFS. It can be any kind of storage. It can be an S3 storage. It can be a bucket on Google Cloud. It can be a local storage on each of these Artifactory instances, or it can be a shared storage like this, right? So this is the setup for your Artifactory HA cluster. Now let me show you how this HA cluster would work. Let's go back to my Artifactory instance. So this is my Artifactory HA configuration. My URL is pointing to my load balancer. If I go to my admin and go to HA, this is where it will show you that how many nodes I have in the cluster. So right now in the cluster, I have 2 nodes, R21 and R2. These are the URLs. So R21 is my primary member, R2 is my secondary member, right? Now let's bring one of these nodes down and see if I can still access the cluster. So I'll copy the URL. Not the URL, I only need the IP. And let's open our terminal here. Let's close this. So SSH. Okay. Now let's take a look at the service that we are running right now. Okay, so Artifactory Tomcat is running, and this would be my primary instance. Let's double check if it's primary instance or not. And then I'll take a look at my HA node.properties. Okay, so this is my primary member, and let's take a look at the second instance. Let me copy the IP here. Okay, same thing, I want to make sure Artifactory is up and running. Okay, the Tomcat is running, and let's take a look at the configuration. So and this is the primary false, right? So this is my secondary instance, this is my primary instance. As mentioned, R1 is a primary, R2 on the UI here is a second, right? So let's bring our primary down and see how it behaves. Okay. The factory stuff. Okay. All right, let's refresh this page. Oops, I was pointing to the All right, so as you can see here, my Artifactory HA is running without the primary node, but I'm able to do everything. My cluster is up and running. I can access Artifactory, I can run my builds, I can download my artifacts, I can do my deployments. So let's take a look at our admin HA page and see. So as you can see now, my @1 is down, right? The last heartbeat was received a couple seconds ago. But yes, so this instance is down, but because my another node is up and running, I can still do my day-to-day activities. Okay, so this is what I want to show is that even if your node goes down, your cluster would be up and running. You can do all the activities that you want, and it wouldn't affect your build infrastructure. Let's go back to our presentation. So the next step is the storage challenge, right? We do see this on and off that storage is a big problem when you scale. How do you make sure that Artifactory would scale with you in terms of storage? So coming back to our explosion of binaries problem, that once you are scaling your instances to different sites, different geographic locations, it means that you are now increasing your production of binaries onto all these different sites as well. So you make sure that you can store all these things. So sometimes the local storage is not enough. So in this case, what Artifactory can do is Artifactory can support any other kind of storage. It can support object storage, your direct attached storage, your network attached storage, your shared file systems, any backup appliances or storage appliances you want to use like NetApp or EMC or Pure Storage. Anything can work, right? Few things to keep in mind about S3 when you are using object storage is that, well, firstly, Artifactory will support the entire AWS ecosystem, so not just the storage piece, so not just the S3 piece, but it will support RDS for your database requirements. It will support EBS, EFS, S3 for your storage requirements. It will support ELB for your load balancer requirements. So basically, Artifactory supports complete AWS ecosystem. Talking about the storage here, until Artifactory 4.x, what we required was if you are using object storage like AWS S3 object storage, then you would need a write cache, that is the NFS write cache in between, so that we are making sure that we are not suffering from any write latencies or not running into write performance issues. But with Artifactory 5.x, we removed this requirement. So now your NFS write cache is optional. You can actually talk to your storage directly from your Artifactory instance. You don't have to have any cache in between for your writes or read. If you want to, you can still have it. You still have that option, but it's not a requirement anymore. It's an optional thing. In terms of having multiple mounts or multiple points of storage, Artifactory also now supports binary sharding. So what it means that you can attach multiple mount points to your Artifactory instances and then have Artifactory write to those mount points. What it gives you a fully optimized scalable solution. It means that you can let's say you have a limitation of 20 terabytes of mounts, right? Your IT wouldn't provision more than 20 terabytes of space in one piece. And then this is not enough for you. If you want to have more space, you are running out of options here, right? But with Artifactory sharding, what you can do is you can mount multiple 20 terabytes of mount points to Artifactory and then leverage them as one big giant storage. So this is what sharding would look like. In our case, let's we have example of 3 mount points. And by the way, along with file store sharding, you also have an option to have your artifacts available onto other mount points as well. So basically introduce redundancy into your storage now. So what is going to happen is your Artifactory application is going to talk to your sharded configuration. So your binary file store configuration, and then that configuration decides how many mount points you have and what's your redundancy count looking like. So let's forget about the redundancy right now. Let's just talk about your Artifactory, your file store, and 3 different mount points. So in this case, what is going to happen is you will define these 3 mount points into your file store, and Artifactory, when it's writing the artifact onto your file store, it would be written onto any of these any one of these mount points in a round robin fashion. You can change this mechanism if you want to write based on the available storage and not randomly pick the mount. You can also change this in the configuration. But ideally, what's going to happen is once you write the artifact onto Artifactory, it's going to get written behind the scenes on any one of these mount points. Let's say you have a requirement of having the mount points highly available as well. So for example, you are writing the artifacts a couple times a day. A few of your artifacts are going on to mount 1, few of them are going to mount 3, few of them are going to mount 2. Now, later part of the day, mount 1 goes down. What happens? It means that the artifacts that were residing on mount 1 are not available anymore. You lost them. So to attack this challenge, what Artifactory introduced in the system was having the option of redundancy in the write. So it means that now you can define how many times you want to have the copy of that particular artifact available. So in our case, let's say we have 3 mount points. So it means that our M is equal to 3. And we define our redundancy count into the configuration as well. So in our case, let's say we want to have 2 copies of every single artifact out of these 3 mount points, right? So my redundancy count is 2. Now, any artifact that is coming onto Artifactory would be written 2 different times, each on each mount point, right? It's not going to write it's not going to make 2 copies on 1 mount point. It will randomly pick 2 different mount points and write on those 2 mount points. So it means that if one of those mount points goes down, you have a backup copy. You have another copy available from different mount point. So let's walk through the example that's on the screen. We have 3 different artifacts. We have a square object, we have a round object, and we have a triangle object. So when the square object comes into Artifactory, Artifactory will randomly write that square object onto 2 different points. In our case, it got written onto mount 1 and mount 2. Subsequently, let's say a round object comes in for deployment, and Artifactory will again randomly pick 2 different mount points. So now it decided to write the round object onto mount 1 and mount 3. And lastly, triangle comes in. Artifactory goes through the same mechanism, and now it writes to mount 2 and mount 3. So as you can see on the screen, you have 2 copies of each object. If mount 1 goes down, you still have all the 3 objects available. If mount 2 goes down, you still have all the 3 objects available, right? So this is how you can achieve redundancy for your mount points as well. And by the way, it doesn't have to be just 2. You can also have full redundancy as well. So it means that if you have a full redundancy configured, every object that is coming in, it will be written onto all the mount points available. So in this case, if I bring a square object, it would be written onto mount 1, 2, and 3, right? So now you have 2 copies of any particular artifact. So this is the sharding that is available through Artifactory now. The sharding itself is really powerful. A lot of our customers are loving it and adopting it on a bigger scale. Next challenge would be security. We briefly touched on to this in the beginning of our discussion. So what kind of security access or options do we have with Artifactory? We all know that Artifactory allows integrations with LDAP, AD, OAuth, SAML authentication, and Google authentication. Basically, GitHub or Google for OAuth, and then Okta or any other SAML providers for SAML authentication allows HTTP SSO. So we are good on authentication side. What about the users that are not part of my AD group or LDAP group, or not part of my SAML group? Like Jenkins user, for example, or a cleanup script, for example, or any other faceless user, right? Or let's say a contractor that I'm bringing in for just a month. In this case, what Artifactory allows you to do is it has the feature for access tokens. You can generate access tokens for these kind of users. And these tokens can be used across multiple instances, and then you can define the timeline on these tokens as well. So for example, let's say I have a contractor coming in for 4 weeks. I can generate access token for him. I can define what kind of permissions that access token will have, and then the token will expire after 4 weeks, right? So you can create these kind of tokens as well that would have a flexible scope as well. You decide what kind of access that token can get, read, write, what repositories, what artifacts, what kind of promotions and so on, right? You can pick and choose what exactly you want to allow this access token to do. So this kind of access token was introduced lately to Artifactory, and then this token can be authenticated against clusters as well. So for example, you have a contractor coming in, you have Artifactory cluster in United States, one in Europe, and one in Beijing, for example, in China, right? So you don't have to actually generate 3 different access tokens. Your contractor who is using this access token can talk. Well, you can configure the token to be allowed access onto all different clusters at the same time, right? So that way you are not creating 3 different tokens, and he doesn't have to deal with 3 different tokens. Or your Jenkins user, for example, your Jenkins is deploying onto Artifactory US right now, but you also decide to run a couple builds on multiple data centers. It's not an ideal case, but for example's case, let's talk about it. So in that case, you can allow Jenkins to deploy to this multiple clusters or different instances at the same time with the same token, basically, right? And then if you don't want this kind of authentication where you want only access to cluster A and not B and C, you can configure the token in a way. So token gives you full flexibility in terms of how you want to allocate access and who you want to allocate access to. And then you can basically revoke or refresh the token from any of those clusters, and then you can decide the timeline on when the token expires. Now, the last challenge we discussed about was monitoring and management. How do we monitor and manage our Artifactory instances? So for this, we have a tool called Mission Control. Mission Control is specially designed to monitor and manage multiple Artifactory instances from one UI or one application. So basically, you can have 10 Artifactory instances or 20 Artifactory instances, and they all can be managed through one application that's called Mission Control. Mission Control basically takes over 80 to 90% of your admin responsibilities from Artifactory onto Mission Control. So for example, a really basic example is, let's say you have 10 Artifactory instances across the globe. You are creating a repository. You are just adding one Docker project, and you are adding one Docker repository. In this case, you'll have to create a Docker repository onto 10 Artifactory instances, right? If you are into full mesh topology. But with Mission Control, what you can do is you can create the repository once and push that change onto multiple Artifactory instances in one go. So that you are only creating this change once and pushing it to multiple instances, right? So this is kind of benefit that you get from Mission Control. And apart from this, it can monitor your Artifactory instances from one UI as well. So monitor all the JVM parameters, your JVM health, your virtual machine health, and so on. So this kind of monitoring is also available. And it can also manage the licensing for your Artifactory instances as well. So you can supply licenses to your instances from the central application. I won't talk much in detail about Mission Control. We do have a dedicated webinar for Mission Control. So I would highly recommend take a look at the webinar. It must be available on our JFrog YouTube channel. And we'll also have a webinar up on our Bright Talk channel as well. So that would be an on-demand webinar. You can find us on Bright Talk and get all the copies of the webinars over there as well. For the closing, I do want to bring up our swampUP user conference that's coming up in May. That would be held in Napa Valley. This would be a 3-day conference. Basically, first day would be a full-fledged hands-on training. I would be taking advanced automation, advanced configuration with Artifactory, Docker, Jenkins, and X-Ray class. So if you want to learn more advanced topics about Artifactory or X-Ray or Docker or Jenkins, or just how all these pieces combine together in one big pipeline, I would be taking that class. It would be a day-long class. We also have several other classes there. So I would highly recommend at least take a look at the schedule and take a look at the classes being offered, and then sign up if you think that this is going to be an interesting conference. I personally think it's going to be a lot of fun, so highly recommend taking a look at the webpage. And we just also announced our gala speaker, this guy. Everybody knows this guy. I don't need to introduce him. A very big star of the HBO show Silicon Valley. So this is going to be our, he's going to be our gala speaker. So as I said, it's going to be a really, really fun conference. Take a look at it and register today. All right, guys, if you have any questions, I do have a couple minutes, so feel free to send your questions onto the Q&A tab, and we'll be able to answer them. We do have 5 minutes left, so I will be able to answer a few questions. Okay, we have one question. The user is asking if Artifactory would allow you to have multiple nodes into cluster, and what kind of downtimes are required for adding or removing the nodes from the cluster. So basically, Artifactory, as I mentioned earlier, Artifactory will scale with you, so you can add nodes on the fly. You don't have to actually bring the cluster down. You can keep the cluster up and running. Yeah, you can add and remove the nodes without having to bring the cluster down. Okay, there's one more question. The question is, how easy is the upgrade of HA cluster from going from one version to second version of Artifactory, or upgrading the cluster basically? So upgrading the cluster is really easy. All you have to do is you have to update your nodes in a rolling fashion. So you update, you have, let's say you have 3-node cluster. What you'll do is you will bring down node 1, basically update it, and then put it back into the cluster. Do the same thing with node 2, do the same thing with node 3. So this way your cluster is always up and running, and you are doing upgrades on a rolling fashion onto your cluster. So there's no downtime associated with this. Okay, so if you guys don't have any questions, then we can wrap it up here. The recording for this webinar should be available soon on our YouTube channel, so feel free to take a look at that within a day or two. It should be up there. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be also putting this onto our Bright Talk channel. So if you are subscribed to Bright Talk, then you can get access to this webinar on Bright Talk as well. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for joining the webinar. Enjoy your day. Thank you.